We have the best jobs in the world. Some people say they want to change the world, but we get those opportunities each and every day. We have the greatest opportunity to change the world we live in. You know, like Aristotle said, the habits we form in childhood make no small difference, but rather they make all the difference. So at this time, I'd like to just find out a little bit. Can I find out who here in this room is an administrator? Outstanding. Teachers? Fantastic. The way the rest of the presentation is set up is I've done this presentation for administrators where I focus on how do you implement a school-wide character education approach, and I've also done this for classroom teachers on how do you implement a character education within your classroom. So I'll kind of ping-pong back and forth, but they really match up quite nicely. So whether I'm speaking as a whole school, you can think of it as your classroom if you're a classroom teacher, or if you're an administrator, you can think of what we're talking about as a classroom on a much larger level. Next thing I want to ask, how many people here are in middle school? Oh, my people. I love middle school. Middle school is where it's at. I've worked at the high school. I've worked at middle school. I went and observed elementary schools. That wasn't for me. I love my own children grabbing me, but not other people's children grabbing me. But I love middle school. Middle school is really, I think we have the best opportunity. We have the best. Some people say, how could you do middle school? It's the hardest place to be. No, it's the best place to be. I say in elementary school, they're a lump of clay. And those elementary school teachers do that fundamental forming and shaping, which is so critical. And bless them for having those skill set to do it. But we get the opportunity in middle school that they come in with form and shape, but we help them carve in those features that make them unique, that make them who they are, but they're still malleable. You can still help form that sculpture of who they're going to be. I've also worked at high school, and let me tell you, they get fired in the kiln somewhere around 9th grade. And high school puts on these beautiful glazes, which gets them ready for the world, but you try to make those big fundamental changes, you start cracking and damaging that sculpture. And there's lots of research that comes out that really does say right between the ages that students are at in 7th and 8th grade is some of the most prime opportunity to really get the core values set into them. That's also because of it's a maturation process. When they're younger, they're just going to listen to what mom and dad say, hopefully. And I say that as somebody with a 5-year-old. But they're really just going to listen to what we're saying as parents. Get to middle school and they're starting to get that part where they're starting to pull away from their parents. They're trying to really formulate who they are, what do they believe. And there's a lot of research that comes out and says that this is really where those values start getting set into them. Doesn't mean they're not malleable. Doesn't mean that they can't change and evolve as they get older, but it's the most fertile soil. The most fertile soil is right there in 7th and 8th grade. And that's why I love it. That's why we take all this time to talk to them about character, to talk about who they want to be. I have so many conversations with students when they get sent down to my office and I say, who do you want to be in this world? And they're almost like, you're not going to talk to me about why Mrs. Roberson sent me down here? No, what do you stand for? What are your values? In fact, one of my favorite assignments to give students is, like in the packet that you have in front of you, there is a listing of the 24 universal character strengths that Dr. Martin Seligman came up with. And I'll talk more a little about him in just a moment, but he did research of hundreds of thousands of people across the world. And he identified 24 universal character strengths that no matter where you're from, what your social economic background is, religion and so forth, that these were agreed that these are values, that everyone agrees. Now different cultures rank them differently based on their cultural norms, but everyone agrees they're valued. So I give this to the students and I say, write down your 5 that you feel you have or you want to have. And they write down the 5. And then I say, now tell me how you demonstrate it. If I just met you, how would I know this is what you stand for? Say, if you can tell me that you're respectful, but do you show it? And after I have them do that, then the conversation about why they got sent to my office comes around. And what's really great is at that moment, then they go, no, I'm not living up to my own values. Now I've got buy-in from them. Now they're really making, now it's not just I'm in trouble and the assistant principal's talking to me about what I did wrong. No, now I'm talking about who do they want to be in this world, and now are they living up to their own goals that they've identified. So talking about character education, this is nothing new. This goes back for thousands of years. Most character education for thousands of years came from religious writings, from spiritual practices across various different religions. I won't go through and read all those, but it's a striking similarity between all of these statements on what each one of them values. So, character education, always been, how do I live a good life? Why am I here? I was advised by the morning session that if I had to cut something out, to cut this one out. So, with reluctance, because I'm a former history teacher, I love the history part of it, I'm going to kind of skip down there just to the very present, which is talking about Dr. Sullivan, Dr. Carol DeWitt, and Dr. Angela Duckworth, some of the great people that are really doing the research, because research really has kicked in since about 2005 with great research that really talks about the incredible value. Because I think we always knew for a long time that character education was important. We didn't really have the evidence behind it. Now we're really getting the brain science that talks about the importance of it. Now we're really getting data that talks about why this is so critical and the kind of impact it's having on our schools. So the two things now I want to talk about is climate and culture. The culture of a classroom is influenced by the expressions, encouragement, and the expectations of the teacher and the students. And then the climate is an outcome of the culture. And that's the classroom climate is an outcome of its culture, and the culture is primarily affected by the physical setup of the room, its scenery, and its senses. I can walk into a classroom when I'm doing an observation and just look at the wall and try and figure out what is this classroom value, just by looking around. The tone of voice that the teacher has. I'm always concerned if I walk into a classroom and there's 4 signs on the wall that talk about the rules of the classroom. That concerns me. If that's what's up on the wall and that's the main thing I see are the rules and regulations that that teacher has there, they seem to be more concerned about people following these rules than they're worried about the learning that needs to take place. So here's a breakdown, and again, this is based on a book called Awakening the Learner, written by Daryl Scott and Bob Marzano. Daryl Scott was the father of Rachel Scott, who was the first victim in the Columbine shooting. And he does a lot of talking about the importance of leading from heart and teaching from the heart and really going to that part. And then Bob Marzano really goes into more the science part of it. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with Bob Marzano. But this is really what they broke down culture into. The expressions, the encouragement, and the expectations. And then the climate is broken down into the setup, the scenery, and the senses. Now, I didn't do this as well as I wanted to because I was up here trying to play around with tech, but that's why I was trying to role model standing at the door and greeting people as they come in. That's why I wanted to have music playing when you walk to the door. When I've done this presentation other times, I walked around before anybody got there and sprayed around some orange zest in the air, trying to engage everybody's senses, from what you smell, what you see, how you feel when you walk to the door. This is what's going to set the tone when you walk in, and the same thing is true with the students. I think students are so keen. When they walk in the classroom, they can pick up immediately. When a student walks onto the campus, if it's a campus that has a high value of character, you can sense it when you walk onto the campus. So what I ask you to do right now, and actually I'll click through a couple of these first. So here's just a few things when you walk into the classroom. For example, I love that this teacher had this assignment, famous failures, focusing on the growth mindset. She actually tried to hit the English standards by getting the kids to write. She worked on the tech by having them do some certain things on Google Docs with it. But then she had them research famous people and talk about their failures, for them to realize that failing at something is part of life. And when you fail at something, it doesn't mean you are a failure. It means usually first attempt in learning. So for them to realize that growth mindset and how it's impacted these people, and some pretty famous people up there. And then here's something else that just talks about the digital citizenship. You know, I love the comment that we heard from George in the keynote yesterday, where he talked about kids are doing the same things we did when we were kids, but they just have the opportunity now to post them to social media. I cannot tell you how grateful I am that that was not around when I was a kid. I don't believe I would have a job today. You know, a picture of me putting lighter fluid on my motorcycle helmet and lighting it on fire, that probably was not a good idea. The day I was playing with my father's .38 revolver pistol and I blew out the TV set, that would not have gone over well on my social media account. Kids love it when I tell them that story, though. So again, focusing on the positive as well. We actually all have pins at my school that say B. And that's because we did a school-wide activity. We talked about, what do you want to be? And we had the students identify that, and they wrote down their words. And so a bunch of different classrooms have this up on their wall, and students go, this is who I want to be in this world. So what I'd ask you to do for just 2 minutes is, in the packet that you have there, and I can put it back to the slide if you want to look it up on the screen, but do a quick analysis for your school or for your classroom. Can you cite evidence for where you are on those different levels of culture and climate, both at your school and in your classroom? Because again, going back to being purposeful, I'm sure you do great things. Sometimes we just don't take the time to think about it and say, oh yeah, I do that. Oh yeah, that's something else I do. Once we can identify, then we can refine it. We can get better at it. So take just 1 or 2 minutes, take a look through that, and see if you can identify what's some evidence of things that you do. And I'll click back to that so it's up on the screen as well.
I know.
And it's okay if you want to talk to your neighbor about it too.
What's interesting? Most of the classes I go into, I can't think of one that I've gone into that are so different. No, they don't. There's some
There you go.
It's kind of look like we're saying, can you verify
student products to celebrate them on the wall and things like that. Yeah. I mean, I still have my few things for sure. I was just talking to some student talking about having students make their own inspirational posters and stuff. And mine got up by the, and so, I mean, I'm just thinking of all these different things we can do. We can do them through this life unit because we'll be doing fresh too. Because these boys turns out. So how do we stay away? How do good people not do that?
I'll give you a big tree here too as well.
So I think if you walk in, you're going to see student products, not always teacher. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. We don't have to show them. We can just tell them there's no picture of them. Well, if they're on the presentation, the presentation's on the
I know, right? I know, it's like, that's where my God, oh yes, you matter. You matter.
Oh, okay.
I have done, I put some of the most famous failures on my Google Classroom.
Oh, and I'm looking for more. I mean, we did the DAR and the Elks.
Yes.
So that's what's right.
Classroom climate is outward. So basically, the culture is the most important, but that's going to influence the whole. So the culture is basically the most important part, and then the climate I think is an outward of.
So the culture is
I can
like
just
the
flip through
physical
real quick and not
background.
even mention. I could just say
Well, it's the
winners.
setup of the room. These are things that
Just
probably
not just say,
are the most
do
visibly
the contest is the idea. Here's an example.
is going to be
Who's
how
there?
is the room set up.
Think about
Again, thing that we're
Yeah, I don't
walking
see
around
anything
classroom,
else about it.
everybody's in rows.
Just outer
But
horn.
that's culture, right?
Because it's not really
That
art
culture
generation.
That would be an
Well, well, it
example
can
of
be.
climate, is
They did artwork this year and
the
submitted
scenery,
it.
the what's written up on the walls.
I mean, it
you know,
evolved
what do you
from
feel
just being a
seeing
prose
walking through
assignment.
these? That's all work climate.
Okay, so this
Just
Not interject as much.
no real
Oh, I have pre-TSA this
or
time.
that is affected by
I got randomly chosen. I was randomly assigned pre-TSA. Mm-hmm.
It's okay. I just want to, I feel like I'm getting enough.
Kristen says it happens randomly. It's assigned randomly. My son got it.
And I know I'm probably not giving you enough time to do that, but let's move on to the next thing.
It was random.
So when we're talking about character, everything needs to be looked at through the lens of character. And that is something that we've been focused on again at my school for a number of years. And later on, I'll talk about some of the ways that we came about and created the character education approach at our school. And it's how we look at everything. When we sit down and we talk about discipline, we're looking at the lens of character. When we're talking about RTI, we're looking at standards-based grading. We all look at that about how are we affecting the character of the students, what is the character of the school. So, our words have power. As I mentioned earlier, we can say things that can raise students up, and we can say things that can tear students down. A few years ago, I was at my 20th high school reunion, and I bumped into Richard. And Richard, when I was in high school, was what we would call back then a rocker stoner. That would have been his classification. You know, the Iron Maiden 3/4 length sleeve shirt, long hair, leather jacket. Richard had his own issues going on, but I remember seeing Richard our senior year, and I bumped into him, and we started striking up conversation, and at one point finally goes, well, you know, I actually didn't graduate. I said, what do you mean you didn't graduate? I said, I saw you there. I saw you your senior year. I remember talking to you in the second semester. He's like, yeah, I was walking down the corner of the hall one day, and the assistant principal and the counselor were talking. They didn't see me walk up behind them, and the counselor was talking, and she said, man, that Richard Hanson's a fuck-up. He goes, I walked out the door. He goes, I just turned right there, walked out the front doors of the high school, never came back. Thought about that so many times since he told me that story of what would that counselor think if she realized that careless, thoughtless words to say in the hallway would have such an impact. Now, did Richard have other things going in his life? Was it just that one thing? No, it was everything in life. There's many things going on, but that was the last thing. That was the last thing that pushed Richard over the edge. He sat there and said, he goes, you know, because I manage a bar now. He goes, because I have a kid in high school, and I talk to him all the time and say, don't do what I did. What could have my life have been if I would have just graduated from high school? What other opportunities would I have had in life had I graduated? We also have great power to do positive things. Saif was a student of mine when I was the dean of students at the high school. Dean of students, I basically say my job description was drugs, alcohol, fights, and tardies. That pretty much summed up my job description as dean of students. The deputy sheriff that was stationed on campus said I was his partner, because we would go search cars together and all sorts of other real fun things. So Saif could not stop smoking pot. I mean, it got past the point of I'm suspending Saif. It came down to now of what can I do to help this kid? And we'd have conversations all the time. I'd go by and I'd see Saif in the morning and go, Saif, did you get stoned this morning? Yeah, and I go, man, you're going to algebra. Being stoned and algebra don't go together. It's hard enough to remember it when you're sober. We talked. I sent him articles. I talked with his mom. It was no longer about discipline. It was about what can I do to help him. Well, some years go by, and I move on to another school, and a few more years go by, and I'm back in my office, and the secretary comes back and says, Steve, there's a man that wants to talk to you up in the front office. Now, for those of you that are administrators, that worries you. You're like, okay, who's at the front? What do they want to talk to me about? Is it an angry parent? Gosh, it's at the end of the day on a Friday. Oh, God, that's not going to be good. So I walk up front, and there's Saif. He's in a shirt and tie. Looks great. He came by and said, I just graduated from college, and I just went for my first professional interview. And I had to look up and find where you were so I could come back and say, thank you. I would have never made it if it wouldn't have been for you. It was my favorite professional moment. Now, I don't say that in a boastful way because I'm sure every single one of you have that same effect on students. I hope you've had the opportunity for them to come back and say that, because that's a rare thing, and that's why it was so special that he took the time to come back and say that to me. But that's fuel in the tank. That's what keeps us going as educators. That's what reminds us this is why we are here, because of the great impact we can have on students. Because everyday actions, what we do, matters. But really, the best character education takes place in the moment. It's great to do Character Day, and I'm a big proponent of it. Take a look at letitripple.org, take a look at Character Day. There's a time and place to say, let's talk about Character Day. But really, the best character lessons happen in the moment. They happen when you sit down with the students and say, you can't keep smoking weed, man. Or it happens when you're talking about science. You say, let's talk about gene manipulation. What do you think? Is that ethical? Is it unethical? Could be in economics. Let's talk about the economics of poverty. Let's talk about distribution of wealth. Let's talk about what's going on in politics today. Let's talk about that is when the best character lessons take place. When they're real and in the moment and not necessarily so scripted. So on the table in front of you,